Hello and welcome to the British Dapper, and today we're talking about my sartorial slip-ups and mistakes I regret so you don't have to, part 2. Now many of you will recall that I have mentioned my uncle, who was a really good tailor in his day, who made me some bespoke suits, and I really regret now getting rid of those suits. At the time I appreciated the suits and I wore them and they were lovely suits. I went through a phase where I didn't need to wear suits because of the nature of the work I was doing, and so I just got rid of them to get some closet space, and in the process of that, not really thinking about when I might need to wear suits again. And unfortunately, my uncle passed away, and those bespoke suits that would have been very expensive to replace, I ended up replacing them with shop-bought suits, and unfortunately, the quality is not there. And I've never felt comfortable buying off the peg again, even though I know now how to buy off the peg and how to get them adjusted to get a better fit. It's never going to be the same as being bespoke and having unique fittings for your body type. When it comes to jackets, trousers or suits, even coats, whether it be wool, silk, mohair, all those materials are natural and breathe really well. Linen, cottons, they are really good for wear as well. Unfortunately, a lot of suit and trouser materials can be used where they are, for example, man-made fibres. It's cheaper to produce, but the longevity of the item is questionable, especially with prolonged wear and frequent wear. So it's just something to bear in mind. If you're buying a jacket, suit or a pair of trousers, think about the long-term effect of buying that item and how it will be able to carry you through for a lot of years. I would always suggest try and go for the best item you can afford. Try not to be too much of a cheapskate. So spend a bit of money. The long-term benefits are going to pay you back with a really good fitting suit, pair of trousers that will wear really well over the years. Something else to consider is if you're buying a suit, the trousers always wear out more quickly than the jacket. So it might be wise to not only buy one pair of trousers, but to buy two for that jacket. So have two pairs of trousers made with that jacket. And if you're going bespoke, why not try two different styles of trouser? For example, have one that's pleated and has a turn up, and one that is flat fronted and straight. And you have a bit more flexibility with your overall look using the same suit. One of the other things that I regret doing is buying a suit that is trend based. In other words, it's fashionable at the time. And I go back to many years ago when I bought a suit because everybody was getting this suit, everybody liked that style. And it was, in those days, in the 70s, it was flared trousers and a wide peak lapel suit, which was great then, but within a few years that fashion had died completely, and I was still left with a suit that I couldn't really wear, and when I did, it was a little bit out of place because nobody else was wearing that style anymore. And so now I look at more classic looks, something that's never in trend but never out of style. And with that, I get something that carries me through no matter what happens with the designs or patterns, I can still look in the best possible way, not out of style, but still looking sharp. The other thing I would consider is when you buy a suit, as an example, consider buying one with a waistcoat. Now I know people say, oh, waistcoats are a little bit dated. Well, they can be considered that. It depends on the style of the suit. But sometimes I think a three-piece suit is really sharp, especially for the business look. It also, a waistcoat gives you the benefit of camouflaging, if you like, that paunch if you've got a bit of a paunch on you, but also it does flatter a really good look with the suit, and it does give you a layer of extra warmth in the more cooler months. But it's something that once you buy it, you have the option to use it. You don't always have to use the waistcoat and make it a three-piece. You can not use the waistcoat and still use a two-piece suit, and it's still a good look. But not having the option is the problem. So if you can buy a three-piece suit, buy a three-piece suit. With that, you could also use a waistcoat as a separate item, as a statement piece. And it's a really good flattering look, especially if you are in a warmer situation where you don't want to wear a tweed jacket, but you've got a tweed waistcoat. You can add a little bit of detail with that waistcoat. So in some respects, I wish I'd have got into waistcoats a little bit earlier in my youth. I'm sure we've all been there over the years, but when it comes to buying socks, I've bought socks that were cheap, and unfortunately sometimes when the toe piece is sewn onto the actual main part of the sock, you get a little ridge. Now that ridge is great until you put your shoes on, and that then compresses down and actually ends up being very uncomfortable on the foot and can actually rub to give you blisters. So it's not always the wisest thing. So now I try and look for socks where that toe piece has got a much smoother finish on it, and we don't get that rub. But that means potentially spending a little bit more on your socks. And something else to consider is how much you want to spend on these things and the fibres and materials you use in them. For example, it's very easy to get caught up with buying boot socks. And boot socks are quite thick, long lasting, hard wearing, but they're designed for people that wear boots. And boots tend to be a size larger than a normal shoe size. So you get an increase in the width of the actual boot to accommodate a boot sock. The problem is when you start wearing shoes and using a boot sock, and you will find that all of a sudden what you thought was your shoe size is the wrong size. And it's just a simple case of wearing the wrong socks with the shoes. So something you learn: thinner socks for shoes, thicker socks for boots. Don't try and cross them over. If you do, you end up with boots that are a little bit sloppy on the foot because you're wearing a sock that's too thin for it, or you end up with a thick sock in a pair of shoes and it's too tight. Something else to consider is the length of the sock as well. And over the years, I've had mid-calf socks. They're fine, but they do ride down a little bit with wear, and not the ideal thing to wear with a suit potentially. So try and go for something that covers the calf, and that way you end up with a sock that stays in place, so when it's worn it doesn't show flesh at the bottom of the trouser. So when it comes to socks, then think about the length of the sock, and if it's too short it will show too much ankle. The idea is, with a suit or something like that, to use something that's more of a full length which would cover the calf. Therefore it holds it in place and you don't get that problem. And it is a much more finer looking aesthetic than a ruffle of a sock that's loosely fitting on the foot. To the other extreme, if you're going to wear shoes where you don't want to wear socks or be seen to be wearing socks, then make sure you get a no-show sock. But make sure it is exactly that. It doesn't show. I've seen people wearing no-show socks and you can actually see the top part of the sock as well as the shoe. So make sure when you do that, you shop around and get the right sock for that fit. And the final thing I want to talk about is fragrances. Now, I'm not an expert on fragrances, as many people aren't. But what I would say is that I've made some monumental mistakes with fragrances over the years. Now, back in my youth, in the 70s, there were very few fragrances for men that were cheap and cheerful, let's say. So, for example, if you couldn't afford Gallienne or Yves Saint Laurent or something along that level of quality, then you were with Brut, High Karate or something similar to that, which was okay in the day, but becomes quite dated. And so maybe if I'd have spent a bit more money and bought something a bit more longer term, I'd have had a much more sophisticated smell, fragrance, and it would have set me up better for later on in life. Whereas those cheaper versions didn't really do me any favours in the first place. And I was more drawn by the fact everybody else was wearing these in vogue fragrances at the time. Having said that, there are a couple of fragrances that still are really good now. Paco Rabanne is one, and also Aramis is another one, which has lasted decades and still has a good fragrance smell to it. One of the things that I would suggest, which I constantly fail to do, is to pass something by your wife or partner prior to buying it. Otherwise, like me, you end up buying stuff that you like, but then nobody wants to be around you when you're wearing it. So just think about that one very carefully before you make that purchase. Sometimes you get it right, but sometimes you're going to get it wrong. Everybody has a different taste when it comes to fragrances. So think about that if you want some peace in the household. And the final thing I would say is try not to get drawn into that trend setting, that because everybody else is buying this stuff, you've got to buy the same. And Sauvage is an example. Because of the publicity that's been put behind it and the advertising that's driven the sales on that, it is not a bad fragrance, don't get me wrong, but it's one of those ones that has been so heavily advertised, everybody's wearing it. So you don't stand out if you buy that because you're part of the herd. The idea about a fragrance is that it's unique to you or more unique and draws attention for the right reasons, hopefully. So be a little bit careful about that, following the trend. Think about, is it going to enhance your experience or make it worse? Anyway, just a few ideas there for you. And just wanted to remind you about, we have a Patreon page where we give exclusive videos on different subjects. We also give updates on what's happening behind the scenes, and depending on your level of access, you may be eligible for one-to-one question and answers sessions and an opportunity to have a video call with myself if you have a particular issue you want to discuss or just wanted to have a catch up with me on a personal basis. But I'll leave the link down below so you can check that out. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to subscribe, then please feel free to do so. We have a Buy Me a Coffee page, so if you'd like to make a contribution to the channel, then please feel free to do so. We also love constructive comments, so if you'd like to make some, jot them down below. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. And if you've got a question you'd like to pose to us or you'd like an answer to, then why not jot it down? We'll try and answer your question for you. We also like ideas for future videos, so if you want to make a contribution and make a suggestion about future content, then please again jot it in the notes below and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. The next video could be something that you've recommended or suggested. So until next time, take care.